Okay, so today we're going to be looking at tissues, and there are four primary types of tissues, and we're going to focus this video on epithelial tissues. Epithelial tissues are a little bit bigger of a concept than the other types of tissues, mainly because they're classified in multiple ways. So first of all, an epithelial tissue is anything that secretes or covers the body, or perhaps even lines the interior portion of our body. So the first way we're going to classify tissue that's epithelial is by the shape of the cell in this lining or layer. And then also the second way is, for this specific type, is whether it has more than one layer or not. So if we're looking at the cell shapes, they're going to be either very flat, and we call this squamous. They can be square shaped, and we call this cuboidal. Or they can be rectangular shaped like this, and we will call this columnar. So this is the first way we're kind of classifying epithelial tissue that is either covering or lining the body. The second component to it is depending on how many layers we have. To determine the layers, first of all, we're going to find what we call the basement membrane. And this is usually like a kind of a long, dark colored substance on a stain. It's a little bit different than the others. And then if we were looking at something like a single layer, then it would just be like this. So these would be considered squamous cells. So this would be one row, and we would then name it simple. And since it's squamous, we would call it simple squamous epithelial tissue. If we have more than one layer or row, then there's a little catch to it. So first, let's go ahead and make the row. So again, that's our basement membrane. And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. So we know that this is several layers deep, rows of cells, and so this is going to be what we call stratified. So here's the trick with this. When we're looking at these rows of epithelial tissue, we're going to name it based on the most superficial layer, the outermost layer. So if this is our base, then this is the top, or what we often call the apex. So if we're talking about that row, we call it the apical layer or apical row. And we will name this specific type of epithelial tissue based on this row here. So that is, again, flat, like we're seeing here, those squamous cells. So we're going to call this stratified squamous epithelium. And of course, if we had more cuboidal or columnar cells, then it would be like simple cuboidal or simple columnar, or stratified cuboidal or stratified columnar. All right, so the second type of epithelial tissue is the one that secretes. And when we're talking about it secreting, it's going to be classified in, again, kind of one of two ways. And that is whether the duct, so we have a duct, and is it tubular or is it rounded? If it's tubular, then it's simply going to be called tubular. And if it's rounded, then we'll call it alveolar. Hopefully you can read that. So we have our tubular and our alveolar. Now if there's just one of these, again, we're going to call this simple. However, if we end up with it projecting out into several, we'll call this compound. So we end up with simple tubular or simple alveolar, or maybe compound tubular or compound alveolar. And that's how we're going to look and classify our epithelial tissues.